I woke up at about 2:30 in the morning to find a tall praying mantis being and a cloaked being by the side of my bed. I thought to myself, what sort of crazy dream is this? The cloaked being looked at me from beneath its hood, revealing its black skin, which appeared leathery and reflected light, much like a beetle skin. I shut my eyes, thinking it must be a realistic dream, but when I reopened my eyes, the figures were unfortunately still there. The cloaked figure looked up to the tall praying mantis type, as if it was confused as to what actions it should take next. The praying mantis then turned its head towards the hooded one and made a series of high-pitched clicking sounds. I sensed this was the one in command, and possibly the other one was some kind of security guard. It's at this point I realised I'm definitely not dreaming. I can hear them. I couldn't move and my brain went into a deep panic. I didn't want to look too closely at the mantis, so I just glanced at it. I recall that it was tall, at least 7 foot. It had to bend its neck because of the height of the ceiling. Its head was pointed, with large eyes. Its forearms were extremely long and moved in a jerky fashion. The cloaked figure was closer. It was crouching by my bed, so I couldn't tell how tall it was, but I could clearly see that it was wearing some kind of overlapping rigid armour, including metallic-looking breastplate that had a series of circles on it. Its head was dome-like, with emotionless facial features. Its eyes were large and surrounded again by detailed ridges. It acted in a way that reminded me of a robot or an insect. I remember thinking to myself, nobody's going to believe this. A giant-sized mantis and a medieval-dressed alien standing in my room. It was at this point that the mantis bent its upper body over my bed and directly above me. In its hand, it was holding a long metal object that looked like a needle. A green light shot directly from the needle and into my right eye. Maybe it was a laser, I'm not sure, but I do know it felt very painful. I could see all the veins from my eye, the same effect you get when an optician checks your eyes. I screamed, but no noise came out. I then felt something stick into my skull. I'm not sure what, because by that time I had my eyes closed. I pretended to sleep and went into a deep panic. My mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles per hour. I heard a great whooshing sound, and then, when I next opened my eyes, thankfully they had gone. I lay shaking and confused for what seemed like hours and just couldn't return back to sleep. At no time did I feel they cared about my health or me. They seemed to have an insect cold type mentality. I really thought I was going to die. The next day I spent the whole day in bed and felt as if I had been through a major operation. It's very painful to recall, and since this incident I sometimes hear clicking sounds inside my head. I was in shock for a long while afterwards. Jim goes on to say, I can say this definitely happened, this was definitely real. I have no answers or conclusions, but I think it's important to get real life accounts out there. The Mantis alien encounters are quite rare in the UFO literature, and every account that I've read has this very high strangeness quality. Take this one for example. One time, I woke up to see a large praying mantis creature sitting in a chair looking at me, and there was a small hooded figure next to him. I can't tell you much about the smaller figure because I didn't pay that much attention to it. I was more terrified of the larger creature. It had my full attention. One thing I do have memory of is noticing a large gold medallion on its chest area. I also know that it was very tall, even though it was sitting in a chair, and I think it was wearing some kind of cape around its shoulders. I do remember also feeling like it was studying me with indifference, if that makes any sense. Like it didn't seem to care that I was looking back at it, or that I was terrified. More like I was just an object in front of it that it was looking at. And these are the main things that stand out in my memory. The next account is from a woman who became lucid and aware during an experience with a mantis alien. After coming to full consciousness while in the middle of an encounter, I came face to face with a praying mantis looking thing while standing in what I presume was a ship. It was over 6 feet tall, but hunched and folded over so that if it stood at its full height, it would be considerably taller. It was tan brown with black eyes and an upside down triangle shaped head. It totally resembled the praying mantis. no pincers or antenna, but given my extreme close-up view, it was an obvious comparison. My first coherent thought upon seeing this thing was, and I kid you not, monster. But I was so shocked I couldn't even scream. What was freaking me out the most were the wriggling, long, earthworm-like things coming out of its mouth area, which was at my eye level exactly. It was the most horrifying sight, and seeing it while wide awake was stunning in a way that is difficult to describe. As I stared at the mouthworms in a state beyond panic, I shuddered to imagine how it would eat me, knowing it was too late for escape. For the mantid's part, its reaction makes me laugh to this day. It was mentally connected to me already, and telepathic, but unlike the Greys who seemed too different to humans to get it regarding everything emotional or social, this guy was on the ball. His face couldn't move, so he couldn't make expressions that I could detect, and there was no way he could convey body language or tone of voice, so his ability to communicate was totally mind to mind. Yet he did this exceptionally well. In my mind, I felt the mantid send me the emotional equivalent of an eye roll and a long-suffering sigh. And then in English, in my head, he said to me, still conveying this overly theatrical, put-upon air, "I'm not going to eat you. I couldn't if I wanted to. These things are my nose. You've done this before with me. I'm checking on your health by smelling you." And then he seemed to wait, sort of smiling mentally at me in amusement, waiting for me to figure it out. And then I did remember, although to be fair, he could have created the memory. I remembered seeing him before several times. A dim set of memories came to me of almost an ongoing relationship of sorts with this particular mantid, and also of seeing many varieties of other mantids. I remembered about the super nose on these guys. The worms could retract back into the face, or they could be put outside of the nose for a more in-depth scent capture. These mantids' take on physical reality was so different from ours because of this, I seem to recall. They could hear and see real well, but scent was the most powerful sense for them. They'd put any dog to shame. I was face to face with him so he could examine me by scent alone. I said to him mentally, "I must really stink to you, huh?" He replied with more sardonic mental tonality, "You have no idea." I laughed out loud. What a difference between this fellow and a grey encounter. I tilted my head and regarded my monster. Fear gone, but adrenaline still making my heart pump fast, and without much thought I almost automatically reached out and touched his face. He didn't have soft skin, but rather a hard shell-like covering. Was it natural like a real bug, or was it armour? And so my right hand reached up to touch the brow ridge area over his left eye. I ran my fingers back and forth over it, and I was amazed. It felt exactly like the shell of a Brazil nut. He held himself still for my touch, and didn't object. In fact, he seemed rather pleased that I had overcome my natural fear enough to manage such a thing. In the meantime, he had retracted his nose parts. Noticing this, a question sprang into my mind. I wanted to touch his squiggly nose things, and he knew my question as soon as I knew it myself, and so pushed the worm things out again towards my hand. I realized it was a hard thing for him to do because touching and smelling me was an extremely intense thing for him, as his scent organs were so sensitive. He seemed to tell me this without words, so I made sure my hand, now down to his nose level, was held very still. A brief touch and I was satisfied. Those organs may have looked slimy, but they felt sort of silky and dry. After I pulled my hand back and he had pulled his nose back, we regarded one another for a moment, and I told him he needed to let me remember this encounter. He must have agreed, though I only retained those brief few minutes. Everything before and after is gone. In almost all of the reports I've managed to find, the experiencer has been in some sort of altered state. Often they wake to find themselves paralyzed. They are fully aware of their surroundings but unable to move or make a sound. This condition is known as sleep paralysis, which is a natural function of the human body upon falling asleep. However, the vast majority of people remain unconscious during this state. I think the human mind and altered perception play a large part in these bizarre experiences. Psychonauts are the explorers of inner reality. They explore the inner workings of their mind through things like meditation, lucid dreaming, and other riskier methods. Researchers and experimenters from this group often report contact with entities which feel like they are outside and independent of the experiencer's consciousness. And, not surprisingly, the Mantis feature large in these reports. I was lying on what seemed to be a large marble slab, cold and hard. Surrounding me were 4 7-foot-tall, emerald green mantis-type creatures, all chittering at me in some high-pitched language. I felt no fear, no threat. It seemed they were trying to communicate, though none of their sounds made any sense to me. This went on for what seemed like about half an hour. Then I began to wonder how I would get back. And as that thought crossed my mind, it was like a rubber band contracting as I snapped back from hyperspace and into my body. And now the following is an edited report from an experience with the sacred plant, Ayahuasca. My first ceremony was much more grounded and was more of a personal affirmation. This dose hit me fairly quickly, what felt like within maybe 15 to 20 minutes. It began with the appearance of Mother Ayahuasca, the prominent female figure who appears in many ayahuasca visions, as well as several entities that looked to be a praying mantis blend of plant, insect, and machine. They guided me through the experience. The second ceremony is what really blew me away. Things slowly began to creep up on me. I had subtle visions of the faces of alien beings, like how you'd typically imagine aliens, the greys, with the pale skin and the big dark eyes. During the end of the ceremony, when we had all started to come down and discuss things around the fire, I finally felt like I could speak. I asked, "So, did anyone else see any beings?" To my surprise, Macarena, a girl from Chile who sat on the opposite side of the temple, said that during her experience she saw aliens standing over me. I didn't expect that. To have the experience verified by a witness, external, outside of my own mind. It totally reinforced the idea that what just happened to me was something very real, that perhaps this plant medicine opens us up to a level of consciousness that can access a higher dimension. This next Psychonaut report is interesting because it shares some unusual details with Spiral End's account. I allowed myself to relax and meditate, and clicked into a hyperspace dimension replete with the machine-like spaceship environment, droning cicada rhythms, and the insectoid entity. As I was wandering through this envisioned ship, I was acutely aware that it was a lucid dream, and yet I was trepid to explore further. But at the same time I was very curious. There was a man who acted as a guide, and, perhaps sensing my fear, was about to show me the exit when I became aware of this other entity. The guide said that she had taken an interest in me and that I should not be afraid. I felt like I was being examined by this thing. It had features that seemed both reptilian and insectoid. It was quite large and hovered around me. It had tentacles or some sort of fleshy parts that protruded from its scaly undersurface. It was definitely female. There was some sort of a sexual interest it had in me. Under its examination, I was helpless to resist or move in any way. It was highly unnerving. Forager shares some thoughts on the experience. I get the sense that there are forces at play in another dimension that we in our reality just don't need to know about. Experienced shamans and other psychonauts might inhabit this space quite comfortably, and maybe there is some grand interdimensional council that influences the universe. Perhaps psychedelics provide the vehicle for cross-dimensional travel. I know others have posited such a theory. Jacques Vallée, who is regarded as a leading UFO investigator, has gone against the grain of mainstream UFO research by combining the UFO phenomenon with many other paranormal anomalies to offer a much more far-reaching theory to help explain and almost unify the paranormal. Here is a quote from good old Wikipedia describing Vallée's position. Vallée proposes that there is a genuine UFO phenomenon, partly associated with a form of non-human consciousness that manipulates space and time. The phenomenon has been active throughout human history and seems to masquerade in various forms to different cultures. In his opinion, the intelligence behind the phenomenon attempts social manipulation by using deception on the humans with whom they interact. Could these Mantis experiences be a glimpse into this non-human consciousness which works behind the scenes? Maybe. The idea that there is more to this three-dimensional physical reality is not a new concept to humanity. The afterlife and all that dwell there has been a part of all human cultures since the beginning of culture. It's a deep topic, that's for sure, and to delve into it means asking a lot of questions about your mind, consciousness, perception, and reality. Who knows? Perhaps the new wave of paranormal investigators will be the Psychonauts.